Welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video, and today MV Agusta announced their brand new Enduro Veloce adventure bike, and it has to be said it looks pretty flippin' tasty. So here we go with the 8 key things that you need to know about it. Now, some of you might partially recognize this bike, and that's because it's effectively the more affordable mass market version of the LXP Orioli that they announced at EICMA last year. The LXP Orioli, I guess, was intended as a limited edition special one-off to launch this line of bikes with a big bang, but the starting price, it has to be said, was pretty steep at €30,000, which is equivalent to around £26,000. This Enduro Veloce version, though, is a little more affordable, so let's take a look at the specs. Now, at the heart of this bike, there's a brand new 931cc triple-cylinder engine, and whereas plenty of other MV triples over the years have focused on producing a maximum peak horsepower figure at fairly high revs, the idea with this one is to produce much more in the mid-range and make it more usable for adventure riding, of course, but also, one would imagine, for other road bikes that will presumably follow based upon this platform. Now, that all said, it still does make a pretty impressive peak power figure at 124 horses at 10,000 RPM, and so when you set it against the other sub-1000cc adventure bikes on the market, it really is right at the top. Now look, if you compare that to their 800 triple in the Brutale RR Naked, then actually it might not sound that impressive, with that bike making 140 horses at 12,300 RPM. But like I say, that's not really the name of the game, and whereas that bike makes 87 Nm of peak torque at 10,250 RPM, this new 931cc triple uses that extra displacement to deliver a far superior peak torque figure of 102 Nm, yet much lower in the rev range at 7,000 RPM. And while they didn't include a dyno chart in the press kit, MV also say that 85% of that peak torque is available from as low as 3,000 RPM, so I'm expecting it to feel really quite flat and usable, and also plenty of torque really low in the revs like that is super handy when it comes to off-road stuff. Now, MV call out some other interesting features from the engine, like the diamond-like coating on the camshaft to reduce friction, their signature counter-rotating crankshaft, which they say helps with rapid changes in direction, and also this bike gets their 4th generation EAS quick shifter, which should add a little bit of a feel of sportiness. But I actually think, for me, the most exciting thing about this engine is really one of the basics, and that's that it's a triple-cylinder engine with regular 120-degree firing intervals, as opposed to the T-plane crank that Triumph have fitted in their Tiger 900 and 1200, which are realistically the only other triple-cylinder adventure bikes on the market. I reckon this is going to feel much smoother, and that's going to be aided, they say, by a countershaft. But also you get that fantastic, classic triple-cylinder sound, which personally I'm a huge fan of. Now, the engine is housed in a steel double cradle frame, which they say has been tuned for both good road and off-road handling, and it comes with a bolt-on steel trellis subframe that should be easier to replace if it's damaged during the rigors of off-road riding. Also, you've got an aluminium swing arm at the rear, which they say they've used to save weight, and that should lead to better agility. But thing is, overall this bike is still quite hefty. They say it comes in at 224 kilograms dry, and so with a 20-litre fuel tank fully topped up, plus oil, coolant and brake fluid on board, realistically you're going to be looking at a total wet figure somewhere around the 250 kilogram mark, which I would say is probably a little bit above what you'll find elsewhere in the market when it comes to this sub-1000 category. Now, in the press kit, MV compared their specs to the Ducati Multistrada V4 Pikes Peak, the new BMW R1300 GS, the Honda Africa Twin and the KTM 890 Adventure R. But I think, realistically, the most similar competitor for this bike has to be the Ducati Desert X. Both are stylish and Italian, built to be capable off-road, fairly well decked out with tech, and also making a pretty similar peak power figure And yet, the Desert X comes in at 210 kilograms with fluids but no fuel, and so presumably with the similar 21-litre fuel tank topped up, it's going to be around the 230 mark, which is a good 20 kilograms lighter than the Enduro Veloce. Now, of course, the way a bike handles is far more than its weight, but if a light bike is high on your list of priorities, then the Desert X is going to look pretty tempting. Still, the rest of the chassis spec is pretty impressive, with a chunky 48mm upside-down fork built by Sachs that's fully adjustable and gets 210mm of travel, which I would say is generally pretty decent. Also, that's going to be one of the factors that contributes to a healthy ground clearance figure of 230mm. Now, at the rear, there's a progressive monoshock from Sachs, also fully adjustable, and also with 210mm of wheel travel. Naturally, being a relatively tall bike with good clearance for getting over obstacles off-road, this bike is going to sit pretty tall, and so on the standard seat, it does come in at a lofty 870mm, which is probably going to put it out of reach for quite a lot of riders. The good news is, though, that it is adjustable down to 850mm in the low setting, and so that might open it up to a few more potential buyers, and also, even if you're on the taller side, it might be nice to be able to reach the floor just that little bit easier. Now, we've got spoked rims for extra durability and strength off-road, and I think the majority of riders will be pleased to know that they are tubeless ready, and there's a 21-inch rim up front and an 18 at the rear, and so not only should you get better off-road performance with those larger diameter wheels able to roll more easily and comfortably over obstacles and rough surfaces, but also you should get a better choice of off-road specific tyres. In fact, as standard, it comes with Bridgestone's Battleaxe A41s, which are a bit of an all-rounder adventure touring type tyre with a bit more, I'd say, road bias to the tread. But it's also possible to have this bike fitted up with the AX41, which is a much more aggressive, knobbly tyre that's much better suited to off-road riding. Now, what's specifically interesting here is that they've actually given the bike specific settings in the ECU for some of the rider aids like traction control to ensure that everything still works optimally with that type of tyre that has, quite a bit less contact patch. So effectively, they're saying instead of 8 traction control settings that are just used across the board, there are 8 that are specific to the road tyre and another 8 that have been tailored to the AX41. Now, this isn't something I've seen on any other adventure bike, regardless of the fact that, most of them are homologated for the 2 types of tyre, but it does make total sense, so it is a bit surprising not to see it more frequently. Braking is top-notch as you'd expect, with Brembo's 4-pot radially mounted monoblock stylema calipers up front biting down on a pair of 320mm floating discs, and then at the rear you've got a 2-pot caliper on a 265mm disc. And of course, you've got cornering sensitive ABS along with rear wheel lift mitigation, both of which are packaged into these 2 selectable levels. Now, level 1 is more aggressive and therefore suited to quicker road riding and off-road use. And so the cornering function is disabled, ABS on the rear wheel is also disabled, and the rear wheel lift is going to intervene a little less keenly, whereas level 2 is more safety focused with ABS operating on both wheels. Cornering sensitivity is enabled, and also that rear wheel lift is going to kick in a little sooner. Now, there is the option to fully disable ABS, both front and rear, if you want to get a proper slide on, but that can only be done in the off-road riding modes and also the custom all-terrain mode. And look, MVs do tend to be pretty well spec'd when it comes to tech, as you'd probably expect at this price, which we will get onto in a moment. And so naturally, you've got a suite of riding modes with urban, touring, on top of the 2 that I just mentioned, and all of these are going to affect the level of power delivered by the ride-by-wire throttle, 2 levels of engine braking, and the level of traction control intervention and the ABS modes. On top of that, you've also got cruise control as standard, which is a massive must for me on an adventure bike that is ultimately intended to be able to do quite a lot of distance. And all this good stuff is managed through a 7-inch full-color TFT display, which supports Bluetooth and Wi-Fi connectivity. So, as you can imagine, you can hook it up to the MV Ride app for some extra features, including turn-by-turn nav. Then on top of all that, you've got launch control. Not sure that's strictly necessary on an adventure bike, but we'll have it anyway. Front wheel lift control, keyless ignition, LED lighting all round, and LED backlights in the switchgear, which rounds off, like I say, a fairly well-spec'd tech package. But I should also point out that it doesn't really get any of the more advanced or recent features that you might find on a bike like the new GS, like the semi-active suspension that self-lowers when it comes to a standstill, or radar-enabled active cruise control and blind spot warnings. And the price, as I've already hinted, is definitely at the top end of the spectrum. It's £21,800 here in the UK, and so that puts it firmly above other 900 adventure bikes like the Triumph Tiger 900 Rally Pro, the KTM 890 Adventure, be that in the standard spec or the R model, and also the Ducati Desert X that we already looked at, which was previously, I'd say, the most expensive of that bunch. Really, the price of this Enduro Veloce puts it more so on a par with the large capacity adventure bikes at the very premium end of the market, and so it's really only affordable to somebody who's looking at a 1300 GS, the top spec Multistrada models, the Triumph Tiger 1200 and the KTM 1290 Super Adventure. And all of those bikes are way more powerful, and generally they pack way more techie features. And so the question is, who's realistically going to buy one of these bikes at that sort of price? Well, it has to be said, it is absolutely stunning to look at, and you always get something quite special in that regard when it comes to MV Agusta. And then also you probably got to factor in the history and exclusiveness of the brand, which is probably going to be appealing to some potential customers. Really, I'd say this bike is gonna probably have to compete on its riding dynamics and the fundamentals like that, more so than the really advanced techie features. And look, the new engine does sound very appealing to me, and it does make more power than any other 900, as well as getting that counter-rotating crank. And then you've got the super well-spec chassis components that should handle both on-road and off, the versatile ergonomics for both seated and standing riding, and they also say they've put quite a lot of work into the aerodynamics too. So I still reckon it's going to be a fantastic bike to ride, but I'd love to know what you think of it down in the comments below, and whether it's anywhere near worth that asking price. Also, if you do like a bit of MV Agusta action, then I'd thoroughly recommend checking out our full factory tour that we shot a couple of years back. I'll put it on the screen now in case you haven't seen it already. Hit subscribe as well if you haven't already to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll catch you in the next video.